Мы сегодня рады приветствовать профессора Цакмакиса. Он у нас пока в Московском университете с лекциями не выступал. И это замечательное такое новое дело. Я хотел бы сказать несколько слов о нем. Он обучался в Hellenicском университете Аристотеля, где и окончил курс в 1987 году. Затем учился он с 1987 по 1991 в Мюнхенском университете, где под руководством профессора Фласхара защитил блестяще сумма кум лауде диссертацию «Tukydes über die Vergangenheit». Ну, все вы прекрасно понимаете по-немецки, но все-таки я переведу. «Фукидид о прошлом». Она потом вышла в качестве книги. Ну, диссертация чуть-чуть по-другому называется. «Die Funktion der Berichte über die Vergangenheit bei Thukydides». Ну, вот эта книга, вышедшая в Тюбингене в 1995 году, написана на основе диссертации. Ну и нашим коллегам во всем мире, прежде всего, профессор Цакмакис известен как издатель такого пособия по Фукидиду, своего рода справочника по Фукидиду или путеводителя по Фукидиду, как можно было бы перевести, но не знаю. В общем, в англоязычных странах сейчас распространены такие companions to, то есть как бы справочник по Гомеру, по Вергилию и по всем остальным. Вот соответствующий companion to Thucydides был издан в Лейдене, то есть в издательстве Брик в 2006 году под редакцией Антониса Ренгакуса и присутствующего профессора Цакмакиса. Ну и стоит еще сказать, что Фукидид это только одно из направлений, которыми интересуется профессор Цакмакис. Его интересует очень широкий спектр авторов и текстов, в основном древнегреческой литературы, в частности, например, Аристофан, и очень известна его книга, посвященная интерпретации птиц, издана по-гречески в Афинах в 1997 году. Профессор Цакмакиса.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. I did not understand everything, but what is international terms, but nevertheless I thank you for this invitation. It is a great pleasure to be here. This is the kick-off of a new Erasmus agreement between our universities, the University of Cyprus and Lomonosov State University of Moscow, and I'm very happy about this. We'll have the pleasure to welcome you in Cyprus in the spring, and we could also organize the students' mobility. It would be a very great pleasure if students from Moscow can spend a semester or a year in Cyprus, and students from Cyprus could come to Moscow. This is not the language is not an absolute barrier, because the University of Cyprus offers courses in Greek, of course, but there are also courses in English. Our university has a rule that every program offers 2 or 3 courses every semester in English, and from next year a complete program will be established for Greek studies will be established in English language, hopefully from September 20. Thus, maybe even from 19, but that's not sure because the process always delays the accreditation of the program, etc. But this will be an opportunity, and this will be not limited to classical studies, but a program of Greek studies will include also programs in modern Greek, Byzantine studies, also ancient history. Thus, it may be suitable for students from various programs. And still there are also arrangements that incoming students have some special care. You can submit your a paper in the language you wish, of course not Russian, but a European language that we can understand, for example German or French, if your French is better than your English, just in case. And also, it is also possible that students from Cyprus come to Russia. As you know, very many Russians live in Cyprus. There are strong ties between the two countries. In the past they were political, nowadays economical, and of course we have students coming from Russia, born in Cyprus, but having Russian as a mother tongue, but educated in Greek and studying in Cyprus, or from mixed marriages. So it is also possible that this can work, this exchange. But now let's proceed to the presentation. What's wrong here? I cannot understand this message. I'm trying to open my file, PowerPoint file.
Package of compatibility.
Problem. Could we perhaps connect my laptop?
Yes, I think you should press yes.
Press yes.
Yes is
Да.
yes.
Да. No internet connection.
It requires another version, perhaps.
We have this file in another format.
I have my own computer. If we connect it to the projector, this would be possible.
Чем больше техники, тем больше проблем. И умножающая технику умножает проблемы. Wait.
Okay.
Может быть, как-нибудь развернуть чуть-чуть, тихо, но давайте чуть-чуть развернем, чтобы было видно и людям, которые так сюда, чтобы...
Криво будет.
Криво будет, да, тогда
Okay.
тогда не надо криво.
Ой,
Вот так? Да. Все равно как-то немножечко...
As you may have noticed, I'll talk you about historical texts from the first half of the 4th century BC, the Hellenica Oxyrhynchia, which is little known to students and non-specialists alike. This work has not been preserved entire, but the remaining parts are on papyrus. Thus, the remaining parts are included both in collections of fragments, for example, Felix Jacobis Fragmente der griechischen Historiker, you see here, and in the electronic edition of the publisher house Brill, Jacobi Online, or B&J, Brill's New Jacobi, or Jacobi as the Americans pronounce it. But also edited separately. You see here the Teubner edition of Bartoletti, and now we have a more new edition, which and more complete because it includes one more papyrus that has been found after Bartoletti's edition. It was published in '76 by Mortimer Chambers. You see the guy down on the right. In terms of length, the extant parts of this text are far from negligible. It's about 4,300 words of text, of readable text. Yeah, because we also have mutilated parts. This makes about half the length of a book of Xenophon's Hellenica, or 25% of a book of Thucydides, or something less of Herodotus. With the exception of Xenophon's Hellenica, this is still the longest Greek historical text that survives directly between Thucydides and Polybius, a much later historian. Of course, this is not a continuous passage, this text. The largest unit has a length of about 20 Teubner pages, but some pages are heavily corrupt. It is important to note that what survives directly on various papyri, as I told you, found in Egypt and published in the 20th century. So it's a relatively new text for philology. So the 19th century, which coined our perception of the development of Greek historiography and our opinions about most historians, ignored this text. It came after. So we have to revise the history of Greek historiography in the 20th century, and this is not always easy for philologists because the tradition is always very strong, influential. Now, direct tradition through papyri means that portions of a text have been preserved randomly and in most cases anonymously. A disadvantage, but there is a compensation. The random selection is free from another author's filter, his subjective criteria of evaluation, and his own selections. It's free from interventions and modifications, comments and introductions that anticipate interpretation, the connotations evoked by the context, all in all, prejudices. Scholars unanimously agree that these three papyri belong to the same work because of stylistic reasons and because of the content. The existence of three different copies of the same text testifies to the interest of educated readers in Roman Egypt. It belonged, if not to the canon, at least to the works that were considered as worth reading. And this despite the fact that this work was used by later historians, namely Ephorus and Diodorus, who also relies on Ephorus, but possibly drew also directly from the Hellenica Oxyrhynchia. As you know, many historians were lost when later comprehensive histories included the essential information about the period they wrote. Only works worth reading for themselves escaped this fate. Herodotus, Thucydides, Xenophon, and this work apparently belongs, if not to the same category, to one very close to it, next to it. No, not perhaps first class, so famous historian, but very close to this hierarchically respected works. The period covered by the text makes possible that the author is a continuator of Thucydides, another continuator of Thucydides. We know, I'll come to the continuators, I have another slide, but just a few words. You see the time covered in the most comprehensive, in the longest papyrus, the London fragments that were published early in the 20th century, 1908. It's almost more than 70% of the total length, and the period is the beginning of the 4th century. The Peloponnesian War started in 431 up to 404, but Thucydides probably died before he continued beyond 411. So the period after 411 was covered by other historians. We are after the end of the Peloponnesian War in 400 War. While in the Florence fragments, published 1949 by Bartoletti, the man who later did the Teubner edition, cover a much earlier period, about 2 years after the beginning of those continuators' works. And the last fragments, Cairo fragments, published in 76, are a little earlier in 409. As you will see, there is a problem of dating of these events. Oops. Now, the continuators of Thucydides, just to repeat things that you probably know: Xenophon, 411 up to the Battle of Mantinea 362 in 7 books, and fragmentary historians. Theopompus, a quite well-known historian from the island of Chios, who is mostly known for his second work, the Philippica. Over 300 fragments of the Philippica survive. They are included in Jacobi's edition, while from his Hellenica only 19 fragments survive in other authors, so in the indirect tradition. And according to information from other authors, we know that the range of his work was 411 to 394, and we also know that the work included 12 books. Then we have information about an author, Cratipus, an Athenian, but we only have 4 fragments, and they do not help us very much to understand what his work was about and the character of his work. He seems to have included information about Conon, a very important figure in Athenian and Greek politics in the early 4th century. And we have the Hellenica Oxyrhynchia, and of course, if you remember the title of the first edition, Grenfell and Hunt already had pronounced the suspicion that it might be Theopompus, but also possible that it might be Cratipus. It's reflected on the title of the edition in the series of the Oxyrhynchus Papyri, this great project which is still continued. Now, Theopompus and Cratipus are candidates for the authorship of this work, this anonymous work, which is called Hellenica according to the subject matter, Greek history, and Oxyrhynchia because of the place that the first papyrus was found, Oxyrhynchus, which preserved most of the papyri that we have. So that's So the introductory information. As you guess, there is much scholarship on this work, and there are also a number of commentaries. You see, earlier commentaries are of Grenfell and Hand in the Editio Princeps of the work. Then Jacobi, as I told you, included the work in his collection. Then after the publication of the second papyrus, Florence papyrus, the commentary of Bruce appeared in Cambridge University Press, a very detailed historical commentary, rather a standard work for the study of the text. And after the publication of the third papyrus, so on the complete work, we have McKechnie and Kern, 1999. This is in the series Iris and Phillips, you know, these white volumes. Then a short but very informed commentary by a German colleague, Ralph Beerwald. A Spanish work by Roberto Lerida, which is terrible. It's over 800 pages. So it's like students sometimes write everything. He tries to prove that he has read everything, and he makes summaries of the opinions of everybody. But who can read this, I wonder. Still, it's valuable for the researcher who has to read it and detect the information, provided that he can also understand the language, or approximately. Finally, there is the commentary by Billows. This is the commentary which is included in the electronic edition of the Greek historians, of the fragmentary Greek historians, B and J, Jacobi online, etc. So back to this slide. Despite of the existence of 7 commentaries, most of them on the whole work, preserved work, several issues are controversial. First, authorship. So there are arguments in favor and against each of them. I can just mention Theopompus is the most prominent name among 4th century historians who came in question. There are coincidences between 2 fragments of Theopompus Hellenica and parts of this work. This would normally suffice to prove authorship, because we know that Theopompus wrote in the Hellenica about a man called Pedaritus, and we have a fragment ascribed, we have a passage in the Hellenica Oxyrhynchia which is about Pedaritus, and another example of this kind. But then there are also arguments contra. The style of Theopompus is, who was also a rhetor, an orator, is rhetorical, while the style of this work seems to be more flat, more simple, in the opinion of scholars. But the remaining fragments are from another work, from the Philippica, most of the remaining fragments, and they are selected by authors such as Polybius, who criticized Theopompus, or Athenaios, who was interested in particular, quite spectacular subjects, so they cannot be representative. This is the filter of the intermediate authors I told you earlier. And so, in my opinion, we should rather trust Dionysius of Halicarnassus, who gives us a rather different image of Theopompus' style. The image of Theopompus' style, according to Dionysius of Halicarnassus, is quite compatible with the Hellenica, the style of the Hellenica Oxyrhynchia. And I am convinced, it's difficult to say, convinced that Theopompus is the author, and I have also some stylistic and linguistic observations hitherto not attracted much attention, so I hope to publish on the subject and enforce the opinion that Theopompus is the author. Another serious argument against Theopompus' authorship is that he calculates in a different way the period of the Spartan hegemony. This is an argument proposed by Guido Schepens, a Belgian historian, one of the most prominent figures nowadays in the study of Greek historiography, who was also involved in the continuation of Jacobi, not in the electronic version, but in completing the unfinished collection of Jacobi. So new volumes of fragmented Griechische Historica still appear, they are underway. Some of them have appeared on biography and others are expected. And Guido Schepens is the moving force behind this. So this is to take seriously the opinion of such a scholar, but I hope that I can provide also good arguments in favor of Theopompus. I omit other opinions about authorship because of time. So also controversial is the date of this work, and especially the relationship to the publication of Xenophon's Hellenica. Was it published before and after Xenophon? So who knows whom, or did they write completely independently? Some remarks will follow in this presentation. Also controversial is whether another papyrus, the Michigan papyrus, or better known as Theramenes papyrus, is also part of this work. Why Theramenes papyrus? It is about Theramenes, the man who played a role in Athenian politics, especially in the last phase of the Peloponnesian War, but especially in the period after the defeat, after 404, after Athens lost the Peloponnesian War to Sparta. And in this papyrus there is also a part of a speech by Theramenes. This raises a further question, whether this work, Hellenica Oxyrhynchia, included speeches. If the Theramenes papyrus is from this work, then this historian also included speeches in the manner of Thucydides. Of course, his speeches are famous, but also in the manner of Xenophon's Hellenica. This is connected, this is also related to the question of authorship, because one of the fragments about Cratipus is that he criticized Thucydides because he wrote speeches that interrupt the narrative. So he was against speeches in historiography. But it's not sure whether, I'm not sure, and nobody is sure whether Theramenes papyrus belongs to the work. Another point, just to add, that connects Hellenica Oxyrhynchia to Thucydides is also the dating system. I didn't mention it earlier. This historian also dates events according to winters and summers, so he divides the year into seasons, as Thucydides did. He introduced this system and had some followers, and Hellenica Oxyrhynchia is one of them. Another controversial issue, the historical value of this work. He is mostly, this historian is mostly respected, and modern historical research has made probable that its value is higher than Xenophon's. We will be able to compare these two authors by examining a passage. I don't promise you any spectacular results in this respect, but Xenophon is in other questions criticized very, very heavily. Finally, a question about the tendency of the work. Is he pro-Spartan and anti-democratic? He seems to be so, but we should be very careful in pronouncing such judgments. For example, the question which is suscited this political position has been debated for centuries, and the only true thing is that he praises both a tyrant, so Pisistratus, and an oligarchic regime, the one of 411, and a democratic politician. So he plays with our curiosity to draw a very, very secure picture of his political opinions. So these people were kind of philosophers and were not very easily to be put into boxes. Also, the evaluation of the style is a question, as I hinted at earlier, a question of controversy. Of course, there are divergent views about individual passages raised by various, individual issues raised by various passages, and this presentation is devoted to a series of such really intriguing questions raised by the Cairo papyrus, the last papyrus. I chose this topic because it is a nice example from the interplay of history, archaeology and philology including papyrology and textual criticism up to stylistics and narratology. So a little bit of everything will be in this presentation. So here is a part of the Cairo papyrus. If some of you are familiar with papyrology, could tell us perhaps more about the writing. This is from the beginning. This is a picture from Chambers Stoibner edition. Unfortunately, it's not the beginning. It's the first column, but not the first lines. And I will talk about the first lines. You can see here the text with the English translation from Billows, from B&J, and what we can read in this passage is that we have, for example, the word prosbalein, that means attack. You see this in the translation. These letters cannot be read with certainty. They are corrupt. And Könen, the first editor, edited a tau and an epsilon here, but the question is this the most probable reading, or is it wishful thinking because he supposed that an attack is usually on walls, and so I would very much like to see this papyrus, and I am on the way to find it. I have a correspondence with people in Egypt. I had to use intermediate persons, so people who, yeah, you always in these countries you have to know somebody who knows somebody, and now the problem is the number of the papyrus. This number they cannot identify in the Egyptian museum, and I have from literature 3 different numbers, and from correspondence from papyrologists who go to the archive of Könen, I have other numbers, and trying to decide which I will include in my second email, because you shouldn't trust that they will be available for long. So here you see, most probably pleased us, most of the 3 areas of the warships. Topon, place. here is probably Ekvivasas de Pasan 10, disembarking the entire, a reasonable solution, addition, supplement would be dynamin, the entire force. And then we can understand more. Epitis poleos, against the city, Ephesioi, the Ephesians, here of course Lacedaemonion, autois hoi parontes, those who were present from the Lacedaemonians on their side, on the side of the Ephesians. So we know that Lacedaemonians were already in Ephesus. So Ephesus had been a member of the Athenian Confederacy during the Peloponnesian War, but apparently revolted after the Athenians defeating Sicily in 413. And so it's on this, now it's like many other cities is on the side of the Spartans, and Spartans provide some help. There are some soldiers there. And here we can read about another Athenian, Tus men. Now the subject is Ephesioi. We are informed about what the Ephesians were doing or probably seeing. Here, Heoron, men μετατουπασίων στον Αθηναίων ουχ Heoron. Uch can be supplemented because of the continuation. Etichon gar ontes eti poro, because they happened to be still far away. Kai macroteran hodonton eteron badizontes, and following a much longer way, longer track than the others. That means the Athenian force was divided. Tus deperiton Thrasilon horontes, but seeing those around Thrasilus, so there were two Athenian contingents, one by Thrasilus and another by this Passion. Oson hupo parontas, very close to arrive. Appenton apus proston limenaton koreson kalumenon. They encountered, or they went to encounter them at the side of the port, which is called Koresos. Έχοντες συμμάχους τους τε βοηθήσαντες πρότρων, having as their allies those who assisted them earlier, who stood on their side earlier, και πιστωτά τους τότε, and proved themselves to be very faithful, very trustworthy, trusted, etc. And the rest is not so interesting and conclusive. First of all, which event is this? It's not at all difficult to find it out. Thrasylos was an Athenian strategos who, according to other sources, namely Xenophon and Diodorus of Sicily, made an effort to seize Ephesus in 410 or 9 or 8. So there are different theories and of course also contradictions in the sources, because the dating, sometimes the name of the archon is interpolated later, but by later readers who wish to make the text more intelligible, and they add, they know the names of the archons, they have lists, and they add it to the text of Xenophon, especially wrong entries of this kind, and confuse us. And Diodorus is not so much to trust in everything. So most probably 410, but perhaps 9. 408 rather impossible. This Thrasylos had played a role in the period covered by Thucydides. He is mentioned in book 5 and in book 8, of course, of Thucydides, the last book. And he was among the generals who were executed by the Athenians after the sea battle in Arginusae, if you know this from Greek history, from Xenophon. The Athenians won this battle, but because of the storm, the generals were unable to collect the bodies, the corpses of those fallen in the sea. And there was a process in Athens, and they were 6 of them, 6 generals among the Thrasylos, were put to death. The other Athenian, this Passion, is unknown from other sources, but a man called Pasiphon, with the same name with addition of a phi, appears on an inscription as a general in Samos in 410-9. Maybe the text here is wrong, an F has been omitted by the copyist, and this is Pasiphon, the Athenian who was general in Samos in 410. Why is this probable? Thrasylos, tells us Xenophon, made a stop in Samos and delayed there for 3 days. Maybe Pasiphon with his force joined him in order to build a stronger force against Ephesus. Now, let's see the parallel account, the other source we have for this event, namely Xenophon. To spare time, I'll read only the translation, but you can also have a glance on the original. After this, Thrasylos led the army back to the sea, intending to sail to Ephesus. Tissaphernes, however, so the Persian commander in this area, perceiving Thrasylos' goal, gathered together a large army and dispatched cavalry, announcing to all that they must bring help at Ephesus to Artemis. You probably know that in Artemis was a temple, in Ephesus was a temple of Artemis, a very old cult site, and which was rebuilt later to become one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, according to tradition. On the 7th day after the incursion, Thrasylos sailed off towards Ephesus and disembarked his fleet's hoplites around Korissos. So he disembarked hoplites, so the heavy, the soldiers with the heavy armor, with a shield, spears, and thorax, etc. While he stationed the cavalry, slingers, marines, and all the rest around the marshes on the other side of the city. Quite important. Marshes, other side of the city. At dawn, also important, so when the day broke, he led both units forward. So 2 units, one at Korissos, operates at Korissos. He doesn't say that they disembarked at Korissos, but they disembarked proston Korissos. So this was their aim, the direction. They probably disembarked close to Korissos, and this is important. And he goes on. The Ephesians from the city. So back to the Ephesians, as our historian as well, who inform us about their perceptions. They could not see Passion, they could see Thrasylos, so they hurried in one direction. Advanced to meet him, as did the allies whom Tissaphernes had brought there. So Hellenica Oxyrhynchia tells us about Lacedaemonians on the side of the Ephesians. Xenophon tells us about Spartans and the Syracusans, both those from the earlier group of 20 ships, considerable number, and those from the later group of 25, who happened to be present there, having recently come with Euclid, the son of Hippon, and Heraclitus, the son of Aristogiton, and the man from the 2 ships from Selinus, and another 2 ships from another Sicilian city. These all at first attacked the hoplites in Corysos. So now it goes on. We didn't read so far from the Hellenica Oxyrhynchia. We remained at the initial positions. This is the continuation according to Xenophon. They attacked the hoplites in Corysos, routed them and killed about 100 of them, pursuing them down to the sea. Then they turned to assault those alongside the Mars, so Passion, the other unit. There too the Athenians were put to flight, and about 300 of them were killed. And here is only the Greek from Diodorus entry, Katadetin Elada in Greece. Thrasybulus, names are usually wrong, or sometimes wrong, and apparently it must be Thrasilos. There was a Thrasybulus at this time, an Athenian general, so he was confused. Diodorus. Pemthesparchel was sent by the Athenians with 30 ships. Xenophon tells us 50 at another place, more trustworthy, but numbers, you know, on the manuscripts, numbers are just one letter and get very easily corrupt. Kai polon hopliton sin hypeusin kato, kateplesin istin epheson. So, ekbibasan de tendinamin katadiotopus. He disembarked the force at 2 places, prosbolas equisator. Tondendon epexeltonon carteras in machin sistine. And those from inside the city attacked, went out, and there was a very powerful battle. Pandeme de ton Ephesion agonisamenon, the Ephesians struggled, fought with the whole force. Tetrakositon Athenaeon Epheson. They agree on the number. Xenophon tells us about 100 in the first battle and 300 in the second. So, summary, 400 men. Just to remind you the main differences between Xenophon and Hellenica Oxyrhynchia. Lacedaemonians versus Persians on the side of the Ephesians. Is one of the 2 historians correct and the other mistaken? Or may both be right? Both can be right, but they selected different details to point out to serve their own purposes. These selections reflect a difference of perspective of framing context between the 2 historians. For example, Xenophon foregrounds the role of Persia and its claims over Asia Minor. This is a challenge to Greek pride. For his readers, this is repelling. And this is in alignment with Xenophon's over general moralistic stance. There is also a detail in Xenophon. He has told us earlier that Thrasilos had delayed for 17 days, and this gave time to the Persians to prepare the defense of the city. And he also explains the way the Athenians gave these 1,000 hoplites and 50 ships to Thrasilos. They were impressed by a victory by Thrasilos in a rather minor incident in Attica. Thrasilos used it and asked for this force, and the Athenians, the Athenian democracy, spontaneously voted to send this force with Thrasilos. So, no strategy, no plan, but the way the Athenian demos always decides. And this is Xenophon, because Xenophon is very critical of this. Also Thucydides was very critical of the demos, of the decision making in Athens. So he exposes Xenophon indirectly exposes the Athenians, and of course through the mention of the delay of 17 days, he also exposes Thrasyllus. On the other hand, the Hellenica Oxyrhynchia treat the event as an episode of the war between Athens and Sparta, by mentioning Spartan aid in Ephesus. He frames it as part of the Peloponnesian War between these two cities. He is interested in Greek affairs. He mentions the Spartans who were there and some devoted allies who excelled in the past. Most probably they have not been expecting the Athenians. The Oxyrhynchus historian, not here, but in the next slide, also mentions, okay, I just, you have to believe me. You will read the text later, but to spare time, I'll omit it. He also mentions the Ephesian commanders, and he highlights the courage of the Ephesians, the plan of their generals, etc. So there is an implicit praise of the winner. As we read it, we get the impression that they did well. As you probably know from Herodotus, the Ionians were usually treated by other Greeks with suspicion. Herodotus is not he doesn't like the Ionians, and he shows it in several occasions. So the Ionians were traders, interested in money, they made money, they lived in luxury, not interested in politics, so they didn't bother if they were under Persian influence or Athenian influence, provided that they would continue trading and making profit and living, preserving their standard of life. So they never, in Herodotus and in Thucydides, they never fight very bravely and very willingly, and so they are diplomats, etc. If the Ephesians and their neighbors who assisted them in the past, you remember, if they won a deserved victory, this suits perhaps the hypothesis that the historian from Chios, namely Theopompus, is the author of this work. So Chios is part of the Ionian world, and the favorable image of the Ephesians here, in contrast to Xenophon, suits very much this hypothesis. Who of the two is more objective? Which allied forces were more important? We can only guess, or we can judge which text seems more persuasive to us, and this is of course very dangerous. What we can also interrogate ourselves, whether one or the two indirectly rejects, corrects, or implicitly criticizes the other. It is complicated, and we don't know who wrote first, and it is very easy to make hypothetical constructions that seem logical, but still may be false. Xenophon insists very much on Tissaphernes. This is either an effort to answer an existing account in a demonstratively authoritative way, or what provoked the rival version. So the fact that the role of Tissaphernes is repeatedly foregrounded in Xenophon betrays either a very specific purpose on his side, or perhaps that he is reacting against another version. If the Hellenica Oxyrhynchia are a defense of the Ionians in this passage, maybe that the Hellenica Oxyrhynchia is the work that came second, so that the historian is trying to defend the Ionians, to bring in their own perspective. On the contrary, it would be far-fetched to imagine that if the Oxyrhynchus Historia came first, that Xenophon would go so far to undermine this version by showing that it was the Persians who did it, because this would be read as an offense against fellow Greeks. Xenophon wouldn't have done this if in the context he was creating his own narrative. There was already the Hellenica Oxyrhynchia version which was favorable to the historians. This would be very malign from his side. Now, for our taste, Hellenica Oxyrhynchia is probably a better historian, the author of. He includes more information, perhaps because he knows more. But Xenophon has perhaps different aims. Not exhaustiveness and accuracy, but just to indicate an ultimate truth about what really matters. Of course, this is his own interpretation and must be treated with care. On the other hand, details are not necessarily a sufficient criterion to prove superiority. So, if an ancient historian provides many details, we sometimes think, okay, he's well informed, he has good sources, he is very diligent. But on the other side, he may be just inventing more detail, and so the more details you get, so the more dangerous it is to believe in this version, because creative writing, rhetorical manipulation was something everybody was taught, has been taught in his formation. So, there is also an extreme view by German historian Bruno Bleckmann, who believes that the author is Theopompus, but in my opinion for the wrong reasons, and he adopts the criticism of a later author, Porphyry, against Theopompus. And what does Porphyry say? Theopompus did axiopistos pseudostai. He was lying in a manner which you could believe, axiopistos, worth believing. So the way of rhetorical writing in historiography, and very much, he says, is a fabrication. But Porphyry had, in my view, his own reasons to do this, so you see how complicated this is. And still we can find the keys to unlock some problems and gain some answers. In any case, in order to decide between the two versions, we're confronted with problems of historical topography in order to test them in matters that are objective, so geography, historic details. The problem is that we don't know much about the place, not only because the topography of Ephesus changed, but also because we're not sure where this classical city was, if it had a fortification, or whether an acropolis existed, where its harbors were, and hence where the ships of the Ephesians allies were, and can only construct the scenario about the routes and movements of the two Athenian forces. What is far from clear is only the position, the location of Korissos. An additional problem is related to Thrasyllus' plan. What was the target of his attack? A walled city, a fortification, perhaps an acropolis, so also a walled Tyche, but not the city itself. Maybe the Acropolis was just on a hill in the city, in the area. Unfortunately, the two letters that cannot be read don't bring much help. Nowadays, the ruins of Roman Ephesus are one of the most impressive archaeological sites in Asia Minor, about 6 kilometers from the coast. Ephesus was the most important and prosperous city of Asia Minor in Roman times, due mainly to its port at the end of a commercial route connecting the east with the Aegean and Rome. Archaeological research shows that the city was inhabited from the 2nd millennium BC, and it was initially a city in a gulf, but its position and the position of its harbor changed several times because progradation. You see here Ephesus, here is Samos, and this is the modern coastline, and you see that the site of ancient Ephesus is quite far from the sea. Still in the area, in the close to river Kaistros was the name in antiquity. Küçük Menderes is the modern name. So the topography changed because of the progradation of the river delta that continuously shifted the coastline westwards. The sediment of soil and other materials shifted the coastline. So you see here this is perhaps the coastline of around 400. Will return. This is the modern coastline, and earlier you see here in Neolithic times the Gulf went up to 12 kilometers deep. Later it came up to this point. You see 400. We are here, and just have a look on some details. Here is the Artemision, and here is a hill above Artemision. It is called Ayasoluk today. The coastline goes like that, and here must be Korissos, this harbor mentioned in our text. The Hellenistic harbor was here in this much greater gulf, on whose sides two more hills are. Here is, I used a modern name, Panagirdag, and here a bigger and higher volume, Bülbül Dag. And the Hellenistic city, walled city, founded by Lysimachus in the beginning of the 3rd century, moved on the slopes of these two hills, here and here. You see Hellenistic Ephesus, and in the valley between them here. You see here, as the water disappeared, you see the constructed Roman harbor, very famous. The Romans built a canal and a great basin here, which could host 250 ships. So this is the Roman harbor, this red construction number 3. So you have an impression of the site. Now, where was the city? Here you can see it better. Here is Ayasoluk and Artemision, so the hill, a cone, like a volcano, not very high, but not easy to climb up. Only from one side it's flat, and here two other mountains you can see. Again the the modern coastline, Neolithic, and here classical. Here Roman. You see the harbor, you see the Roman harbor. Quite important is the position of this island. It used to be an island, and if you look here about 400, this island is almost incorporated into the land. Yeah, this will play a role in the continuation. So, finally, you can see here Korissos, the two hills I mentioned, Panagir Dag, Bulbul Dag, Roman harbor here, Hellenistic harbor here. You can see also the walls of the Hellenistic city. This is the Lysimachian city, like that. Okay. You can also see a picture, a Roman harbor as it is today. You can see the Roman harbor. Here is the coastline. This is from the east to west. Here is the Roman theater on the slope of Panagir Dag. This is Panagir Dag, this is Bulbul Dag. So the Hellenistic port was here. Imagine that this was sea and Korissos was here. Quite complicated. Finally, you see 1, 2, 3 hills, Korissos, Hellenistic harbor, Hellenistic walls, Hellenistic city. Let's stay at this plan. Where was the city? As I told you, in the 11th century, on Ayasoluk, human presence is attested. But this conic hill has no water, it's not at all suitable for settlement. It was probably a fortification. Now, Herodotus. Have you read Herodotus? First book of Herodotus? Perhaps the students? No. Or yes. Or yes. Maybe. Shy. They don't answer. He reports that in the middle of the 6th century, the Lydian king Croesus, famous Croesus, famous for his wealth, expanding his kingdom, attacked Ephesus. And the Ephesians, he continues, connected the city wall to the Artemision, to the temple of Artemis, with a rope which had a length of 7 stadia. A stadion is about 200 meters, 190. There are various types of stadium. And 7 stadia is about 1,003 or 400 meters. This suits the hypothesis that the city was here, because if it was on Ayasoluk, this is just 200 meters, one and a half stadia. This is 7 stadia. So according to Herodotus, who modern research has re-evaluated, is a very, very good historian. We must trust Herodotus. But neither the archaic city nor archaic walls have been found so far. Austrian archaeologists work in Ephesus. They sometimes, a few years ago, they were sent off by the Turkish government, but from 2016 they continue and they publish their reports, and they are very useful because you have to study what they find every year. So I rely on the most recent reports of excavations of 2017 up to 17 for what I tell you. They have found some classical remains on the northeastern side of Panagirdak, and there is also, so you see here Ayasoluk from the Artemision. This is the reconstruction of the later temple, of course. This is Ayasoluk. On the other side, on my side, is again how it a picture and it's darkened what was supposed to have been the sea. So this is Panagirdak, the Roman theater. This is Bülbüldag, and this is the north. Here is Korissos, and opposite to Korissos here should be this island which became part of the land. What is important? A wall has been found in Ephesus. Has been reconstructed here on Panagirdak. So again, Bülbüldag, Panagirdak, the view from the Artemision. Here, Korissos. Here must have been Korissos. So in between the two volumes, the Hellenistic harbor. So I repeat it so that you get a permanent impression. So. If these walls, the problem is that these walls date to the 4th century. The dating is not very secure because sometimes you rely on findings, but on ceramic found among the blocks. But even archaeologists are very skeptical about how much they can trust this evidence. So, in any way, no archaic walls have been found. Either Herodotus lies, or there were walls, if Herodotus not lies, but not found. If the walls cannot be found, this means either that they have been replaced later by later walls, that they have been, the material has been reused in a way that and the same holds also for settlement. This is even more important because even if no walls existed, houses existed in both the archaic and classical period, and we only found some evidence for settlement here and all around the Artemision area where the city was moved by Chrysos. Well, moved by Chrysos, Strabo tells this. Well, then it was the classical city must have been here, okay? No. I summarize. Archaeological research and literary sources also indicate that Ephesus was a city that was inhabited katakomas, so in various settlements, in various places. There were komae between the two hills, on the slopes, on the foot hills, and in the area here, and perhaps and on other sides as well. And they were also moving, the settlements were also moving according to the needs of the harbor. The commercial area moved, especially because of the changing of the place of the harbor. So I gave you an impression of the context, and let's try to reconstruct in the final minutes the battle. It seems that maybe on this one. In my opinion, Thrasylos with his hoplites must have landed perhaps here, perhaps at a place where he was not seen from the city, which walls here, city here, Korissos here. At night, still at night, he must have come from this side. And he must have sent Passion at a place where he could not have been seen, and such a place would have been if this island was part of the land here. Blackman also agrees that Passion must have been here. So the distance is longer, but why did Passion not arrive on time? Because the plan was that they both attack together from the two sides, yeah? But he delayed. He appeared here, the Ephesians took notice of him, of Thrasyllus, and Passion was still invisible for here, due to the marches, due perhaps to the river which had been had to be crossed. So it was a very bad plan which led to this confusion. This is a very severe mistake to miscalculate the topography, and this matches very much this reconstruction of the site around 400. So I remind you we're in 410, and thus his hoplites must have come from here, about an equal distance, 3 kilometers to walk. It's not too much for hoplites, but still it's not ideal. Now, how did the battle go on? Afterwards, Thrasyllus, the general of the Athenians, when he arrived at the city, left some of the soldiers assaulting it, and himself led the rest against the hill, which was high and difficult and partly curved back inside, but partly was outside the city. This perfectly suits this image that the city was here, and so if you were on this top, there are two tops you see, on this top they might try to climb from here and then up to the top and attack the city from above. So the hill is partly incorporating the city, partly outside. So he divided the force again. He must have come from here, so not in Chrysos, as modern scholars misread the sources, but from here. I think you understood the battle. The final words concern the textual reconstruction. This is the papyrus, and this is the supplements of Köln. Epechirisen prosvalentes tichesi cannot be right. Epechirisen cannot be right because he did not attempt. He did not come very close to the walls so that to attack. And the synoptic tense is for an accomplished action. Even the attempt has not been made. They were still walking, and the enemy came, and there was a fight not close to the walls. Kelefsos tas plestas ton trieron hormisas. He commanded most of the trieries stay there, and tas eteras topon tis Ephesias katalabin. Now, topon tis Ephesias, another place in the land of Ephesus to occupy. They sent Passion, they sent the other ships to occupy another place. But the noun topos usually requires a stronger qualification, an adjective which specifies which topos it is. If it is just a place in the land, in the Ephesian land, you don't use the noun topos. You say just pou tis Ephesias, at a place. A topos must be specified. So there something else must be missing. And my reconstruction of the text is based on the need that all this was a plan. So Thrasyllus, either boulomenos, intending, wishing boulomenos. I say, entafta then Thrasyllus emballas iston golpon, he entered the gulf, prin katadelos genite. Okay, these lines, this is hypothetical, okay? It's not part of the text, but it's exempli gratia, how it could have been and what sort of information. The main of Thrasylos is necessary. Πριν κατά τέλος γίνεται, βουλόμενος, and this is what I believe to be quite important. Βουλόμενος is for me quite sure or a synonym. Εξ hekateru merus prosbalin, from both sides, or an expression we find in Polybius, ektateru merus, again the same, ektateru merus. Ekateros is used 3 more times in the remaining part of the Hellenica Oxyrhynchia, therefore I prefer to include it here, but it could be also ektateru, this from Polybius. Prosbalin, perhaps the στίχεση, Ανασπάτας πρίσας των θηρήρων, he draws most of the treaties, while passion, ενώ passion, or ode passion, έχοντας ετέρας with the others, τόπον της Εφέσου πέραν, on the other side of Epheson, or τόπον της Εφεσίας αφανή, for example, city. This is also attested, Aphanis, invisible, a place which could not be inspected from Ephesus. Aphani, it is used by Thucydides in the account of the battle of Pylos and Sphacteria, etc. So I am afraid that time is over and I cannot conclude. I have no more time if we should keep the schedule. I could add just a conclusion. Is it possible? Okay, thank you. So, to sum up, we propose the reconstruction of the beginning of the text, which is in no contradiction with the context, as Könen's proposals were. It fully agrees with the information we can draw from the text and from other sources, and is based on the linguistic and stylistic evidence from other historians. To reconstruct the historical details of the operation, we use the latest evidence of archaeological ongoing research, which enables us to reject earlier views about the location of the classical city. The question about the existence of walls remains open. Future investigation of the papyrus could contribute to the degree of certainty concerning the possibility that the Hellenistic, the Oxyrhynchus historian mentioned walls. Literary sources, in this case, do not contradict each other. Diverging focus on detail is a result of selections dictated by the author's bias and prejudices, and enables us to better understand the tools used in the historian's dialogue with each other. As our focus is to advance the interpretation of the Hellenica Oxyrhynchia, let me add few remarks on narratological issues. The text does not only include more historical information, but does it in a rather sophisticated way. Two narrative features prove this. A. Temporal arrangement. You probably notice there is a metatauta and then. So there is a distinction between phases, a certain discontinuity which creates suspension and dramatic tension. We're not still at the peak. And then focalization. There is a play with the Ephesians' knowledge and ignorance. We know more and use this knowledge to evaluate the situation in a more dramatic way. The Ephesians fail to acknowledge the presence of a second troop, and we think that this would be fatal for them. And then this troop, as it comes out, fails to arrive on time. Thus the intended privilege, the division of the force for a combined attack, turns to condemn the Athenians. Thrasylos seems overconfident when he divides his force a second time. And this brings us to a last topic, a prominent feature in historiography. Hoplites. Hoplites cannot operate in such environments. Walk a distance, climb up mountains. 10 years later, Iphicrates will develop a more flexible and mobile corps which uses lighter armor, the peltasts, which will be very useful in the Corinthian War. The Oxyrhynchus historian knew this. Hoplites were good enough for a big battle, not for a big war. Thank you.
this maybe some questions, Professor Filogenov.
Is the form embalas attested by the papyrus or elsewhere in the text?
No.
Because I would expect embalum.
Yes. It could be possible. It could be possible. Yeah. This could be possible. I think it is attested in text. Yeah.
Further questions?
With this meaning, with this special meaning in technical language. But it's a good question. It's not the way to make people learn Greek.
Yes. But half are students of first year.
Should be
Да, еще вопросы?
First hours of Embala.
Можно по-русски.
It's late.
Можно по-русски. Мы можем перевести, если таковое. Почему такая вот? Студенты должны задать минимум 3 вопроса, только быстро. Тихо, у вас был вопрос.
В принципе, достаточно понятно.
Everything was absolutely clear.
Really, because there was too much. I know that there was too much information, both historical and textual. But I tried to show how we can all these branches of studies can collaborate to answer questions of each other's discipline.
If students still do not have their questions, I'd like to propose one. I did not understand which is the reason for our security about Hellenica Oxyrhynchia as entire corpus, if it is found in 3 different places on which it's based.
How the 3 papyri? Well, mainly, the context makes this very probable, the content, but mainly on stylistic grounds. For example, the frequent use of men-de constructions and sentence structures, so participle, verb, vocabulary. There is a quite standard vocabulary, for example, with compounds of ago, pro, igeto, stratoma. So, this is almost a standard expression. It is also found in Xenophon, but not with such frequency. Or for noticing somebody, not aisthómenos, not horon, but kathoron. Kathoro is standard. Kathoron, katidon, it's repeated. So there are some stylistic and linguistic features of this type that makes this possible. If you read the text, you really get the impression that yes, this is the same author. So I could add more, but it is common opinion and nobody disagreed. It's the only issue that there is no disagreement on this text, that these 3 belong together. Not other papyri, the Firamenes and a couple others that are included, for example, in the Spanish commentary, edition and commentary by Lerida.
Thank you. Ну что же, студенты придумали вопросы? Да, коллеги, что же вы действительно? Ну, неужели все понятно в такой степени? Yes, they say everything was clear.
I hope so. That would be great.
Ну что же, большое спасибо, еще раз благодарю.